The wind carried dust across the empty plaza of Redemption Creek as Willa Temperance Ashford
Over
knelt
there!
in the
More
dirt,
water on the left
her
flank!
trembling hands
Don't let it
clutching
reach the
last
barn!
coin
Hurry!
she owned. 31 years old, and she had nothing. Not a home, not a family, not even a friend who would open their door. Her husband's sudden death 10 months ago had been devastating enough.
It's worse
But
than we
what
thought!
came after
Tell me
shattered her
everything.
completely.
The deal is off.
Men in dark suits had appeared at her Boston townhouse door with papers she'd never seen before. Debts she didn't know existed. Loans Edmund had hidden from her gambling debts accumulated in secret card rooms, while she believed he was attending business meetings. Within 7 days they took everything. The furniture her grandmother had carved, the quilts her mother had stitched, even the simple gold locket with her parents' pictures inside. All of it sold to pay debts that weren't hers. Edmund's family had been worse than the creditors. His brother Clarence, a lawyer with cold eyes and a colder heart, had looked at her across the empty parlor and said the words that still echoed in her nightmares. "You brought this on him, Willa. Your constant demands, your expectations. You stressed him to death. The family wants nothing to do with you. Get out!" She'd walked out with nothing but a small canvas bundle containing 3 worthless kitchen items the creditors hadn't wanted. An old blackened cast-iron skillet, a cracked clay pot with a chip on the rim, and a wooden spoon worn smooth by 3 generations of use. Her grandmother's spoon, the only thing she'd managed to hide when the men came. The train west had cost her last decent dress, traded to a widow in Philadelphia for a ticket. She'd ridden in the cheapest car pressed between miners and drifters, eating nothing for 3 days. When the train stopped at Redemption Creek, Wyoming territory, she'd stumbled onto the platform with 42 cents in her pocket and blisters on her feet that bled through her worn boots. It was the first week of July 1882, the height of summer. The sun beat down merciless and hot. The settlement had rejected her at every door. Women looked at her torn dress with suspicion, their eyes lingering on the stains and the frayed hem. Men shook their heads before she finished speaking, their faces closing like shutters against a storm. One elderly woman had made the sign of the cross when Willa approached, as if she carried plague or bad luck or both. No one wanted a stranger, especially not a desperate widow with no references and no family name to vouch for her character. Now the sun was setting, painting the sky the color of old blood. Willa's stomach cramped with hunger so sharp it felt like knives twisting in her belly. She looked down at the coins in her palm. 42 cents. Not enough for a room, not enough for a real meal, barely enough to matter. She could feel the townspeople watching her from windows and doorways, waiting to see what she would do, waiting for her to fail to break, to disappear like dust in the wind. Willa stood slowly. Her legs shook. Her vision swam from 3 days without proper food. But something deep inside her, something that had survived Edmund's death and the creditors and the long journey west, refused to bend. She walked to the general store with her head held high. The proprietor was a lean man with suspicious eyes. He watched her approach the counter like she might steal something. "I need to buy supplies," Willa said. Her voice came out stronger than she felt. "Show me your money first." She placed the 42 cents on the counter. The coins made a small, pathetic sound. The man snorted. "That'll buy you a handful of beans and nothing more." "Then I'll take dried beans," Willa said, "and whatever spices that'll buy." He measured out a small portion of beans into a twist of paper, added a pinch of salt, a few peppercorns, a withered bay leaf. He pushed it across the counter and swept her coins into his palm like he was doing her a favor. Willa took the paper packet, 37 cents worth of food. Enough for one small meal if she was careful. She walked out of the store and stopped in the middle of the plaza, the empty dirt square where nothing grew and nobody gathered. The sun was lower now, the shadows longer. In an hour it would be dark, and she had nowhere to go. Willa looked at the packet in her hands. Then she did something that felt like both surrender and defiance. She gathered dry twigs from the edge of the plaza. built a small fire ring with stones she found near the horse trough, used a match from her grandmother's kitchen bundle, one of 3 she had left, and lit a small fire right there in the empty plaza. People stared as they passed. A woman pulled her child closer as if poverty were contagious. A man laughed and said something to his companion that made them both chuckle. Willa didn't care anymore. She was past caring what strangers thought. She filled her cracked clay pot with water from the public pump, added the beans, set the pot on the fire, and waited for the water to heat. While it simmered, she reached into her bundle for the dried herbs she'd saved from the journey, things she'd gathered along the railroad route when the train stopped for water. Wild thyme, dried garlic she'd begged from a farmer's wife in exchange for mending a torn shirt, a small twist of pepper she'd found discarded outside a restaurant kitchen. As the beans began to soften, Willa added everything she had. The thyme, the garlic crushed between stones, the pepper, the bay leaf, a pinch of salt. She stirred with her grandmother's wooden spoon and let the pot simmer, adding water. When it got too low, coaxing flavor from ingredients that cost almost nothing. The smell began to spread through the evening air. It was the smell of home, of care, of food made with love even in the darkest circumstances. It rose like smoke, carrying memories of warm kitchens and family dinners and a life that no longer existed. Willa didn't notice the old man until he spoke. "Smells mighty fine, daughter." She looked up. He was standing at the edge of her small fire circle, leaning on a walking stick. His hair was white as fresh snow, his face weathered like old leather left too long in the sun. But his eyes were kind, the first kind eyes she'd seen since Boston. "It's just beans, sir," Willa said quietly. "Just beans," the old man smiled. "My mama used to say there's no such thing as just beans when they're cooked right. Mind if I sit? It's a public plaza." He lowered himself onto a stone with a grunt. They sat in silence while the beans finished cooking. When they were done, Willa lifted the pot from the fire with the edge of her skirt wrapped around her hand. She had no bowl, no plate, just the pot and her spoon. She offered it to the old man. "I couldn't," he started. "Please," Willa said. "I'd be honored to share with someone." He took the wooden spoon, lifted a careful portion to his mouth, chewed slowly, and then tears ran down his wrinkled cheeks. Willa's heart clenched. "Sir, is something wrong? Is it too hot?" "No." His voice was thick. "No, it's my wife. She passed 12 years ago, come spring. Nobody's cooked with love like this for me since then. You can taste it, you see, the care, every single bite." He handed her the spoon. She took a small portion for herself. They ate together in silence, passing the spoon back and forth, sharing more than just a meal. Sharing something Willa couldn't quite name but needed desperately. When they finished, the old man studied her face in the firelight. "Tell me your story, child." So she did. All of it. Edmund's death, the debts, the creditors, the long journey west, the rejection at every door in this settlement. She held nothing back because she had nothing left to protect. The old man listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "You won't find work in this settlement," he said finally. "They're too small-minded, too scared of strangers. But I know a place about 15 miles north of here, Ironwood Ridge Ranch. Big spread. Needs a cook desperately." Willa's heart leaped. Would the owner give me a chance? Thad Ironwood's a hard man. The old man's voice grew serious. "Lost his wife 8 years back in terrible circumstances. Many cooks have come and gone because he's too demanding, too particular, He paused. "Too broken. But after tasting your food, I'm certain you have something special, a gift. If you show him that you'll have your chance." He pressed a piece of cornbread into her hands. Willa hadn't even seen him carrying it. "Follow the main trail north to the ridgeline. You'll see a fork. Go left. Be there by dawn if you can manage it. They'll be needing breakfast." "How do I?" Willa started. "Tell them Ezekiel Coldwater sent you. Tell them old Zeke said you can cook. That'll get you through the door. The rest is up to your skill and your spine." He looked at her hard. "You got spine, daughter. I can see it. You'll need it with Thad Ironwood. Be humble but firm. Show your worth through your cooking, not words. He doesn't trust words anymore." The old man Zeke watched her prepare to leave. She doused the fire carefully, packed her 3 kitchen items, wrapped the cornbread in her spare kerchief. "One more thing," Zeke said. "Sometimes the hardest people are the ones who need someone the most. If you can touch his heart through your cooking, you might find not just work but a true home." Willa walked through the night. The trail was rough, barely visible in the moonlight. Her feet screamed with every step. Blisters that had formed on the train journey burst and bled inside her boots. Her legs trembled with exhaustion, but she kept moving, fueled by hope and the old man's cornbread and the memory of his tears over a simple pot of beans. The sky began to lighten as she climbed toward the ridgeline. Gray dawn, then pink, then gold spreading across the enormous Wyoming sky. When she reached the fork in the trail, she took the left path as instructed. An hour later, she saw it. The ranch spread across the valley below like something from a story. Fenced fields where cattle grazed in the early morning mist, sturdy barns with fresh timber, corrals where horses moved in lazy circles, and in the center of it all, a large log house with smoke rising from its chimney. Willa stopped at the ridgetop. Her heart pounded so hard she could feel it in her throat. This place could save her, or it could be just another closed door, another rejection, another step toward the end of whatever road she was traveling. She straightened her filthy dress as best she could, smoothed her hair back from her face, took a long breath and began descending toward the valley. As she approached the main gate, ranch hands stopped to stare. 3 men repairing a section of fence, 2 more leading horses toward the barn. All of them paused in their work to watch this ragged woman walking up the main road like she had every right to be there. "Who are you?" shouted a bearded man with massive shoulders. "What do you want here?" Willa gathered every scrap of courage she had left. "I'm looking for work. I heard you need a cook." The men laughed. Not cruel laughter exactly, but dismissive. The kind of laugh that said they'd seen desperate people before and knew how this would end. "The boss ain't going to want you," the bearded man said, almost kindly. "He's too particular, too hard to please. We've had 7 cooks in the last 2 years. None lasted more than a month." "I'd still like to speak with him," Willa said. Before they could answer, a deep voice cut through the morning air. "I'm right here." Willa turned. Thaddeus Ironwood stood 20 feet away, and the sight of him nearly stole her breath. He was over 6 feet tall, with shoulders that seemed to fill the entire doorway of the barn behind him. Dark hair showed gray at the temples. His face was all hard angles and weathered skin carved by years of wind and sun and something darker. But his eyes drew her attention most, gray-blue like storm clouds carrying the weight of old sadness and older pain. He looked at her with an expression that revealed nothing, just studied her like she was a horse he was considering buying and finding lacking. "You're looking for work." His voice rumbled like distant thunder. "Yes, sir." Willa met his gaze and held it. "Old Zeke Coldwater from town sent me. He said you need a cook." Something flickered in Thad's eyes at Zeke's name. "You know Zeke. I met him last night, sir. He was kind enough to share a meal with me and tell me about your ranch." "And what exactly did he tell you?" "That you're a demanding man, that you've had many cooks who couldn't meet your standards, that you need someone who can cook with skill and care." Willa lifted her chin slightly. "I can do that, sir." Thad made a sound between interest and skepticism. "Many women have said the same. None lasted long. I have high standards." "I understand, sir." Willa's legs trembled, but her voice came out steady. "I'm not afraid of hard work. I just need a chance to show what I can do." Long silence followed. The ranch hands had gathered now, a dozen men, forming a loose semicircle watching this exchange like it was theater. Willa could feel their eyes on her torn dress, her bleeding boots, her exhausted face. She lifted her chin and kept her eyes on Thaddeus Ironwood. Finally he spoke. "You got 1 week. 7 days to prove you can cook as well as you say. If the food's good, you stay. If it's mediocre, you leave. Understood." Relief washed over Willa like cool water. "Yes, sir. Thank you for the opportunity." "Don't thank me yet." Thad turned to the bearded man. "Gus, show her the quarters and the kitchen. Make sure she understands the schedule." He walked away without another word, his boots heavy on the packed earth. The bearded man Gus approached with a less hostile expression. "Well then, let's get you settled, ma'am. Name's Augustine Dalton, but everyone calls me Gus. I'm the foreman here." Up close, Willa could see he was missing 2 fingers on his left hand. Old injury healed long ago. He led her through the ranch yard, pointing out buildings. "That's the bunkhouse where the hands sleep. That's the tack room. That's the main barn. The boss doesn't like strangers near the house proper, so you'll be staying in the back quarters." He showed her to a small room attached to the side of the main kitchen. It was tiny, barely large enough for a narrow bed, a washstand, and a small table with one leg shorter than the others. The window was stuck half open, letting in warm morning air. The mattress on the bed looked thin and stained, but it was a room, with a door that closed and a roof that didn't leak. "It ain't much," Gus said, almost apologetically. "It's perfect," Willa said, and she meant it. Gus showed her the kitchen next. Large utilitarian designed to feed many men. Cast iron stove, long work table, shelves of supplies, a pantry stocked with basics, flour beans, dried meat, root vegetables. As they entered, Willa noticed something odd. Instead of oil lamps, there were candles everywhere. Thick candles in holders on every surface. Thin tapers in sconces on the walls. The kitchen was designed to be lit by flame, but never by oil. "Why no oil lamps?" she asked before she could stop herself. Gus's face grew somber. "The boss. He don't abide oil lamps, not since the fire. Candles only. Safer, he says. You'll want to light them all before dark. He gets uncomfortable if the house gets too dim." Willa filed that information away. Another piece of the puzzle that was Thaddeus Ironwood. "Men eat breakfast at 6, Gus continued. "That's 14 of us total, counting the boss. Dinner at noon, supper at 6. Miss a meal or serve something inedible, and you're done. The boss doesn't give second chances when it comes to food." "I understand." Gus studied her face. "Look, ma'am, I'm going to give you some advice. The boss, he's not trying to be cruel. He lost his wife 8 years ago. Fire took the cabin they built together. She was inside. He tried to get her out, but couldn't. It broke something in him. He's been hard as iron ever since." "Thank you for telling me," Willa said quietly. "One more thing. Don't expect him to eat with the men. He takes his meals in his office alone. Always has since Lenora died. Just prepare a tray, and I'll take it to him." After Gus left, Willa stood in the kitchen and let herself feel the exhaustion. Her feet throbbed. Her back ached. Her hands shook from hunger and fatigue. But there was work to do. She explored the pantry, taking inventory. Good flour, salt pork, fresh eggs a luxury, milk, butter, dried beef, potatoes, onions, carrots, basic spices, everything she needed. She had 4 hours until breakfast. Willa built up the fire in the stove, her grandmother's training coming back like muscle memory. While the oven heated, she mixed biscuit dough. Flour, baking powder, salt, butter worked in until it looked like coarse meal, then buttermilk to bring it together. She rolled it out, cut rounds with the rim of a glass, and set them aside. For the eggs, she beat them with milk and a pinch of nutmeg, salt, and black pepper. She sliced salt pork thin and started it sautéing with onions and garlic. The smell filled the kitchen like a promise. Coffee strong and hot. Biscuits in the oven until they turned golden. Eggs scrambled to creamy perfection in the bacon fat. Everything timed to come together at once. At 6 o'clock, exactly 14 men filed into the dining hall attached to the kitchen. They sat in silence, watching Willa with skeptical eyes. She served them without speaking. Biscuits still warm from the oven. Eggs that steamed on the plates. Crisp bacon. strong coffee that could wake the dead. Gus was the first to taste. He cut a piece of biscuit, added eggs, took a bite. His eyes widened. He chewed slowly, then looked up at Willa with something like wonder. "Good Lord," he said quietly. "This is incredible." The other men began eating. One by one, their expressions changed. Skepticism became surprise. Surprise became appreciation. The silence that had been hostile became reverent. And a young cowboy with a scraggly beard cleaned his plate and looked up. "Ma'am, if you cook like this every day, I'm going to work twice as hard. This is the best breakfast I've had since my mama's table." An older hand with a gray mustache nodded. "These biscuits are a marvel, light as clouds." Willa felt her heart swell, but her real test remained. Thaddeus Ironwood hadn't appeared. She prepared a special tray, the best biscuits, extra eggs, coffee in a clean tin cup. She added a small portion of wild strawberry preserves she'd found in the pantry, something extra to show she cared about the presentation. Gus took the tray with a small smile. "Let's see what the boss says." Thad was reviewing paperwork in his office when Gus knocked. "Leave it there," he said automatically, not looking up. Gus placed the tray on the corner of the heavy desk and left without speaking. Thad continued working for several minutes. Then the aroma reached him, rich, warm, comforting. The smell of food cooked with care instead of duty. Almost against his will, he looked at the tray. The biscuits were perfect, golden brown steam still rising. The eggs looked creamy, not rubbery. The bacon was crisp. Even the coffee looked right. Thad picked up a biscuit. It was still warm. He broke it open. The inside was flaky tender. He took a bite. The flavor exploded in his mouth. Butter and buttermilk. Salt and just a hint of sweetness. The texture was perfect crisp, outside soft, inside melting on his tongue. He'd eaten 1,000 biscuits in his 40 years, but this was something else. He closed his eyes without meaning to, and suddenly he was back 8 years, sitting at a small table in the cabin he'd built with his own hands. Lenora across from him, her dark hair falling across her shoulders, laughing at something he'd said. She'd made biscuits that morning, her first attempt after they married. They'd been terrible, hard as stones, burnt on the bottom, but he'd eaten every one and told her they were perfect because he loved her and nothing else mattered. Thad opened his eyes. His hand was shaking. He set the biscuit down, picked up his fork. Tried the eggs. They were perfect, too. Seasoned just right. Cooked with care and skill and something he couldn't quite name. He ate everything on the plate. When Gus came back an hour later, the tray was empty except for crumbs. "Well?" Gus asked. Thad didn't answer immediately. He stared at the empty plate. "She can stay," he said finally, "for now." That night, Willa sat in her tiny room under the light of 3 candles. Every muscle in her body ached. Her feet were wrapped in strips torn from her spare shift, the blisters too raw to leave uncovered. But she had a roof over her head, a job, a chance. She pulled out a small leather journal from her bundle, her only luxury. The pages were half filled with recipes, notes, memories of her grandmother's kitchen. She found a clean page and wrote by candlelight. Wyoming Territory, July 1882. Today, I met the broken cowboy. His eyes hold more pain than winter storms. He said nothing to me, showed nothing. But I saw something beneath the ice, a flicker barely alive. Maybe I can't fix him. Maybe I can't fix myself. But perhaps together we won't be so broken. This morning I had nothing. Tonight I have a room, a job, and a man who needs feeding. Tomorrow I'll cook again. And the day after that, and the day after that, until this becomes home or until they send me away. Either way, I'll cook with everything I have, because that's what grandmother taught me. You put love in the pot and hope in the oven, and sometimes that's enough to change everything. I said I wasn't worth much. I think I was wrong about that too. P.S. Something strange here. No oil lamps, only candles, everywhere. Gus says it's because of the fire that killed his wife. The boss is afraid of oil, afraid of flames that burn too hot. I understand that kind of fear, the kind that lives in your bones long after the danger is past. Willa closed the journal, blew out 2 of the 3 candles, leaving one burning low, lay down on the thin mattress, and felt the ache in her bones settle into something deeper. Outside her window she could hear the night sounds of the ranch, cattle lowing in distant fields, horses moving in their stalls, men's voices from the bunkhouse laughing about something. And somewhere in the main house, Thaddeus Ironwood sat alone in his office by candlelight staring at an empty plate and remembering the taste of care. Neither of them slept easily that night, but for the first time in longer than either could remember, they slept with something that felt almost like hope. The stars wheeled overhead. The wind moved through the valley. And in the kitchen, 3 kitchen items sat clean and ready. For tomorrow, a blackened skillet, a cracked clay pot, and a wooden spoon worn smooth by 3 generations of love. Morning would come, and with it, a chance to prove that broken things could still be useful, that broken people could still be whole. The first week passed in a blur of flour and fire and quiet victories. Willa rose each morning at 4:30 when the world was still dark and the stars hung low over the Wyoming hills. She built the fire in the big stove, her hands learning its temperament, how it needed kindling arranged just so, how the draft had to be adjusted for even heat. While the oven warmed, she mixed and kneaded and prepared. She lit candles throughout the kitchen, dozens of them, creating pools of warm light that pushed back the darkness. She'd learned quickly that Thad sometimes walked through before dawn, and the sight of a dark kitchen made him tense, made his jaw tight, and his hands clench. Breakfast was served at 6 sharp. The men came to expect it. More than that, they came to crave it. On the second day, she made sourdough hotcakes with real maple syrup she'd found in the back of the pantry. The cowboys ate in reverent silence, and one young hand named Billy whispered that his mother used to make hotcakes like these before she passed. On the third day, she prepared a breakfast hash with potatoes crisped in bacon fat, peppers, onions, and eggs folded through. Gus asked for the recipe. She wrote it down on a scrap of paper in her careful handwriting. On the fourth day, she made cinnamon rolls. The smell filled the entire ranch house before dawn, and when the men arrived, they found the rolls still warm, dripping with butter and sugar. A grizzled cowboy named Hank, 55 years old, with a face like weathered saddle leather, took one bite, and his eyes grew wet. "My mama," he said, voice rough. "Lord have mercy, this tastes like my mama's kitchen. I ain't had nothing like this in 30 years. Willa touched his shoulder gently. "Then I'll make them again next week, Hank." Every meal she prepared a special tray for Thaddeus Ironwood. She never saw him eat it. Gus always took the tray to the office, and Gus always brought it back empty. But Thad never came to the dining hall, never thanked her, never acknowledged her presence beyond that first morning when he'd given her the job. She tried not to let it hurt. On the 7th day, her last day of the trial period, Willa prepared Sunday breakfast, a special meal, thick-cut bacon, scrambled eggs with cream and fresh chives, biscuits with honey butter, fried apples with cinnamon, coffee strong enough to raise the dead. The men ate like it was their last meal on earth. When they finished, Gus stood, cleared his throat. The dining hall fell silent. "Ma'am," he said formally, "speaking for all the hands here, we want you to know something. In the 8 years since Mrs. Ironwood passed, we've had more cooks than I can count on both hands. Some were adequate. Most were poor. None of them made us feel like we were eating at our mama's table. You do. Every single meal. And we're hoping the boss has the good sense to keep you on permanent." The men murmured agreement. Billy called out, "Please stay, Miss Willa." Willa felt tears prick her eyes. "Thank you, all of you. This has been the best week I've had in a very long time." That afternoon, Gus found her in the kitchen preparing supper. "The boss wants to see you," in his office. Willa's heart hammered. She wiped her hands on her apron, her grandmother's apron washed clean now, but still carrying its patches and memories, smoothed her hair, followed Gus across the ranch yard. Thaddeus Ironwood's office was in the main house, a room lined with books and maps, and the kind of order that spoke of a man who controlled what he could, because so much had been beyond his control. More candles here, too, thick ones on the desk, thin ones on shelves. The room glowed with soft light even in the afternoon. Thad stood at the window, looking out at the valley. He didn't turn when she entered. "Mr. Dalton says you wanted to see me, sir," Willa said quietly. "The week is up," Thad said. His voice was flat, giving nothing away. "Yes, sir. The men want you to stay. I'm grateful for their kindness." Finally, Thad turned, his gray-blue eyes fixed on her, and for the first time she saw him really look at her. Not past her, not through her, at her. "Can you keep this up?" he asked. "Not just good food, but this, whatever it is you're doing, making them feel like family instead of hired hands." "Yes, sir, I can." "Why—" The question caught her off guard. "Sir, why do you cook like this, like every meal matters, like you're feeding people you love instead of strangers?" Willa met his eyes. "Because my grandmother taught me that food is how we say the things we can't speak out loud. Care, comfort, a home. I don't have much to offer this world, Mr. Ironwood, but I can offer this." Something flickered in Thad's expression, there and gone so fast she almost missed it. $20 a month, he said. "Room and board included. You'll cook 3 meals a day, 7 days a week. You get Sunday afternoons off after dinner. Agreed?" "Agreed." "One more thing." Thad's jaw tightened. "I eat alone. That's not going to change. Don't take it personally." "I won't, sir." He nodded once. Dismissal. Willa turned to leave. "Miss Ashford." She stopped. "Thank you for the cinnamon rolls. They were very good." It was the first time he'd thanked her for anything. The first time he'd acknowledged the food beyond accepting or rejecting it. "You're welcome, Mr. Ironwood." She walked back to the kitchen with something warm blooming in her chest. Not quite happiness, not yet, but maybe the seed of it. The next 3 weeks brought changes both subtle and profound. Willa established routines. Monday was wash day. She did laundry for the ranch house and her own clothes in the big copper tub behind the kitchen. Tuesday, she baked bread for the week, 6 loaves that filled the kitchen with yeast and warmth. Wednesday, she mended clothes sitting on the back step with her needle and thread while the afternoon stew simmered. Thursday was market day. Gus drove her to Redemption Creek in the wagon to buy supplies, and she always stopped to visit old Zeke at his store, bringing him a jar of whatever she'd preserved that week. On their second trip to town, a woman approached while Willa was loading supplies into the wagon. She was perhaps 40, dressed in silk that was too fine for a dusty settlement, with painted lips and calculating eyes. "You must be the new cook at Ironwood Ridge," the woman said. Her voice was smooth as honey and twice as sweet. "I am, ma'am," Willa replied cautiously. "Serafina Locke. I own the Gold Dust Saloon and boarding house." She extended a hand. Willa shook it briefly. "I've heard you're quite the talented chef. The boys from the ranch can't stop talking about your meals when they come to town." "That's kind of them to say. I wonder," Serafina's eyes narrowed slightly, "how long do you think you'll last? Thad Ironwood is a difficult man. 7 cooks before you, none stayed more than a month." "I intend to stay as long as I'm needed." "Of course." Serafina's smile didn't reach her eyes. "It's just that Thad and I have history. I've known him for 10 years, since before Lenora, and I've seen many women try to get close to him. They all fail. He's too damaged, too broken, too—" "Excuse me, ma'am," Willa interrupted gently, "but Mr. Ironwood's personal life is none of my concern. I'm there to cook, nothing more." Something flashed in Serafina's eyes, anger perhaps, or recognition that Willa wouldn't be as easy to intimidate as she'd hoped. "Of course, just friendly advice, dear, from one woman to another." She turned to leave, then paused. "Oh, and Willa, that dress is lovely. Is it new?" Willa looked down at her plain work dress, the same one she'd been wearing for 2 weeks. "No, ma'am. Pity. A woman in your position should have at least one nice dress." for Sundays, for church. You do attend church, don't you? I haven't had the chance yet, ma'am. You should come this Sunday. I'll be there. So will most of the town. Seraphina's smile was all teeth. It's important for newcomers to make a good impression, to be accepted, especially widows with questionable circumstances. The words hit like a slap. Willa's hands clenched on the wagon rail. "Good day, Mrs. Locke," she said, her voice steady despite the anger simmering beneath. Seraphina walked away, her silk dress rustling. Gus appeared with the last of the supplies. He'd clearly heard at least part of the exchange. "Don't mind her, ma'am. Seraphina's been after the boss since before Mrs. Ironwood died. She sees you as competition." "Competition?" Willa was genuinely surprised. "I'm just the cook. You're a woman living on his ranch. In her mind, that's a threat." Gus loaded a sack of flour into the wagon. "She's tried everything to get Thad's attention over the years, brought him meals when he was grieving, showed up at the ranch with offers to help manage the household. Even offered to marry him outright, no courting needed. He turned her down every time. Why, because Thad Ironwood is a lot of things, but he ain't the kind of man who can be bought or manipulated. And Seraphina Locke is all manipulation." Gus helped Willa up onto the wagon seat. "Just watch yourself around her, ma'am. She's got a mean streak, and she don't like losing." The ride back to the ranch was quiet. Willa's mind turned over the encounter, examining it from every angle. She'd made an enemy without trying. That was dangerous in a small settlement where reputation meant everything. But she'd also learned something valuable. Thad Ironwood had been faithful to his wife's memory, had turned down advances, had maintained his isolation not because he wanted to, but because he couldn't bear the thought of replacing what he'd lost. That was both heartbreaking and hopeful. Back at the ranch, the men began to change in ways that went beyond table manners. They cleaned up better before meals, washed their hands without being asked, said please and thank you, talked about their lives, their families, their dreams instead of just work and weather and horses. The dining hall became something more than a place to eat. It became the heart of the ranch. Billy, the young cowboy, showed Willa a letter from his sister and asked her to help him write back. She spent an evening teaching him to phrase his thoughts more clearly, and when he sealed the letter, his face glowed with pride. Hank brought her wildflowers one morning, shyly presenting them as thanks for making his favorite cornbread. She put them in a mason jar on the kitchen windowsill. A quiet cowboy named Samuel, who never spoke unless spoken to, stayed after dinner one night and said, "My daughter's birthday is next week. I ain't seen her in 2 years since her mama took her back east. Could you teach me to make something I could send her? Something that says I remember." Willa taught him to make peppermint bark. They worked side by side for an hour. Melting chocolate, adding peppermint oil, pouring it onto wax paper, too cool. When it hardened, she showed him how to break it into pieces and wrap it in cloth. "She'll love it," Willa promised. "Because you made it with your own hands. That means everything." Samuel's eyes were suspiciously bright when he left. Through all of this, Thaddeus Ironwood remained distant. He never came to meals, never spoke to her beyond brief, necessary exchanges about supplies or schedules, but small things began to appear. On day 10, Willa noticed the crooked leg on her room's table had been fixed. The table sat level now, steady and solid. On day 14, her stuck window suddenly opened and closed smoothly. Someone had planed the frame and added new hinges. On day 17, she found a small stool in her room that hadn't been there before, perfect height for reaching the high shelf where she stored her spare linens. On day 21, a bundle of wildflowers appeared on the kitchen workbench. No note, just mountain asters and Indian paintbrush, their colors bright against the scarred wood. On day 25, she discovered a new wool blanket folded at the foot of her bed. Thick and warm, the kind that would keep the autumn cold away when it came. Willa never asked who left them. She knew. Every morning she prepared Thad's breakfast tray with extra care. She learned his preferences, coffee strong and black eggs, over hard not runny bacon, crisp biscuits with butter, but no jam. She began adding small touches, a sprig of mint on the plate, an extra biscuit wrapped in cloth to stay warm. Once she included a slice of apple pie with a perfectly golden crust. Gus always returned the trays empty. He ate the whole pie, Gus reported that day, a small smile playing at his lips. Asked if there was more. There is, Willa said. You can take him another slice. One morning in the 4th week, Willa was in the kitchen before dawn, kneading dough for the day's bread. She sang while she worked a habit from her grandmother's kitchen, an old French song her grandmother had taught her words about love and loss and bread rising in the oven. She didn't hear anyone enter until a voice spoke from the doorway. Why do you sing when you cook? Willa startled, nearly dropping the dough. Thaddeus Ironwood stood in the kitchen doorway, fully dressed despite the hour. He'd never come to the kitchen before. Never. I'm sorry, sir. Did I wake you? No, I don't sleep much. He stepped inside, moving carefully, like he wasn't sure he belonged here. You didn't answer my question. Willa gathered herself. My grandmother taught me. She said food made with music tastes like love. That singing puts your heart into the work. Thad was quiet for a long moment. The kitchen was dim lit only by the dozen candles Willa had placed around the room and the glow from the stove. In the soft light, his face looked younger, sadder. My wife used to sing, he said finally. His voice was barely above a whisper. French songs. I never understood the words, but they sounded like sunshine, like everything good in the world. It was the first time he'd mentioned his wife to her directly, the first time he'd revealed anything personal. What was her name? Willa asked gently. Lenora. He said it like a prayer, like a wound. Lenora May Bridger, before she married me. She came from St. Louis. City girl who fell in love with a cowboy and moved to the middle of nowhere. She was brave, braver than me. Would you like to sit down, Mr. Ironwood? I can make fresh coffee. To her surprise, he did. He sat at the small kitchen table, the one where the hands sometimes ate their midday meals, and Willa poured him coffee from the pot that was always brewing. They sat in silence for several minutes. Outside, the world was beginning to lighten. Birds starting their morning songs. The fire, Thad said suddenly. Gus probably told you. He mentioned it? Yes, sir. It was my fault. His hands wrapped around the coffee cup like he needed its warmth. I was out hunting. Gone 2 days. When I came back, the cabin was burning. She was inside. I tried to get in, but the flames. I could hear her calling my name, and I couldn't reach her. His voice broke on the last words. Willa's chest ached. She wanted to reach out to touch his hand to offer some comfort. But she sensed he would pull away, would retreat back into his fortress of isolation. It wasn't your fault, she said quietly. I should have been there. You couldn't have known. I should have been there, he repeated harder this time. A man protects his wife. That's the first duty, the only one that matters. And I failed. You're punishing yourself for something you couldn't control. Thad looked at her, then really looked at her, and his eyes were full of something raw and terrible. Aren't you doing the same, running from Boston because people blamed you for your husband's death? The words hit like a physical blow. Willa set down her own coffee cup. Yes, she admitted. I suppose I am. Then maybe we're both fools. Or maybe we're both human. Something passed between them in that moment. An understanding. A recognition of shared pain, shared guilt, shared survival. Thad stood abruptly. I should let you work. The men will want breakfast. Mr. Ironwood, he paused at the doorway. Thank you, Willa said. For the table, and the window, and the stool, and the flowers, and the blanket. His shoulders stiffened. I don't know what you're talking about. But the tips of his ears turned red, and Willa allowed herself a small smile after he left. The morning of day 28 brought trouble. Willa was serving breakfast when she heard it low voices from the cowboys talking among themselves in a way that made her skin prickle with unease. Just saying she's mighty pretty for a cook, one of them said, young voice cocky, a hand named Cole, who'd joined the ranch just 3 days ago. "Cooks like an angel, too?" another replied. "Wonder what else she's good at." Laughter. The wrong kind. Willa kept her face neutral, kept serving, but her hands trembled slightly as she set down plates. "Hey, Miss Willa," Cole called out. "Louder now, performative. How about you come to have supper at my place sometime? I got a cabin down by the creek. Real private." More laughter. Willa gripped the edge of the serving tray. This was the moment. The moment when she would have to speak up or accept being treated like this. The moment when enough. The word cut through the dining hall like a blade. Absolute silence fell. Willa turned. Thaddeus Ironwood stood in the doorway. She hadn't even heard him approach. His face was a mask of cold fury, and his presence filled the entire room like a storm about to break. He walked toward the table where the young cowboy sat. His boots were loud in the silence. When he reached them, he placed both hands on the table and leaned in. His voice was quiet, deadly quiet. "Miss Ashford is here to work. She's the cook of this ranch, and she will be treated with absolute respect. I don't want to hear one more inappropriate comment. Not one joke, not one disrespectful look. Do you understand me?" "Yes, sir," Cole mumbled. "I didn't hear you." "Yes, sir." Louder this time. Thad straightened, looked around the entire dining hall. "That goes for all of you. Miss Ashford is under my protection. She's part of this ranch. Any man who disrespects her answers to me. And I promise you that's not a conversation you want to have." He turned to leave, then paused, looked back at Willa. Their eyes met. In his gaze she saw anger, yes, but also something else, something protective and fierce and almost tender. Then he was gone. The dining hall remained silent for a long moment. Finally Gus cleared his throat. "You heard the boss. Miss Willa is family. We treat family right. Anyone got a problem with that, you can pack your gear." No one had a problem with that. Cole and his friend left the next day, citing other opportunities. No one was sorry to see them go. When Willa went back to the kitchen, her hands were shaking. But not from fear anymore. From something else entirely. Something that felt dangerously like hope. Days 30 through 45 brought an ease to their interactions that neither had expected. Thad began appearing in the kitchen more often. Not every day, but often enough that Willa came to anticipate the sound of his boots on the floorboards. He would sit at the small table with his coffee and watch her work, not speaking much, just present. Sometimes he would ask questions. "Why do you knead the bread that long? How do you know when the roast is done? What makes your biscuits so light?" Willa answered patiently, explaining techniques her grandmother had taught her. Thad listened with an intensity that suggested he was memorizing every word, though she couldn't imagine why a rancher would care about the mysteries of baking powder and buttermilk. One evening, he stayed after the dinner dishes were washed. Willa was making pie crust for the next day, apple pie with cinnamon, and just a touch of nutmeg. "My hands are too big for that work," Thad said, watching her crimp the edges. "It's not about size, it's about patience." "I'm not patient." "You run a ranch with 14 men and 300 head of cattle. You're patient." He almost smiled. Almost. "That's different." "Is it?" She rolled out the second crust, her hands moving with practiced ease. Thad watched like it was the most fascinating thing he'd ever seen. "Lenora tried to teach me to cook," he said suddenly, "early in our marriage. Said a man should know how to feed himself if something happened to her." His voice caught. Turns out she was right about that. Willa's hand stilled. "I'm sorry. She made terrible biscuits at first, hard as rocks. But I ate every one and told her they were perfect." He looked down at his coffee. "By the time she died, she'd gotten good at them. Better than good. Almost as good as yours." "That's high praise." "It's the truth." He was quiet for a moment. "Everything she made was perfect to me because she made it. Didn't matter what it tasted like." "That's love," Willa said softly. "That's foolishness. Love makes you stupid." "Maybe, but it's a good kind of stupid." Thad looked at her then, and something in his expression made her breath catch. "Is that why you married your husband, love?" "Yes, I loved Edmund desperately, completely. Right up until the moment they told me he'd been lying to me for years. She shaped the pie crust carefully, needing something to do with her hands. I don't know if that makes me a fool or just human. Human, Thad said firmly. Definitely human. They worked in silence for a while. Willa finished the pies and set them in the cold cellar. When she came back, Thad was still sitting at the table. "Thank you," he said. "For what? For not asking me to change, for not pushing me to eat with the men or attend church socials or be someone I'm not, for just letting me be." Willa dried her hands on her apron. "You've let me be too, given me space to heal. I appreciate that more than you know. We're a pair of broken things, aren't we? Maybe. Or maybe we're just still figuring out how to work with the cracks." Thad stood, walked to the door, paused with his hand on the frame. "Good night, Willa." It was the first time he'd called her by her first name. "Good night, Thaddeus." After he left, Willa touched the place where his hand had rested on the doorframe. Her heart beat faster than it should. Faster than was safe. Day 50 brought disaster in the form of a telegram. Gus came back from town with supplies and a grim expression. He found Willa in the garden behind the kitchen, harvesting the last of the summer tomatoes. August heat shimmered over the valley. "Ma'am, there's someone in town asking about you." Willa's blood went cold. "Who? Man named Clarence Ashford. Says he's your brother-in-law. Says you owe him money, and he's come to collect." The tomatoes fell from her hands. "How much does he say I owe?" Her voice sounded distant to her own ears. $950, plus interest. Nearly $1,000, an impossible sum. "I don't have that money. I never had that money. Those were Edmund's debts, not mine." "He's got papers, ma'am. Legal documents. Says they're signed by your husband, putting you responsible for the debts after his death." Willa sat down hard on the garden bench. The world tilted. "When is he coming?" "Tomorrow morning. He's bringing 2 men with him. Look like hired guns to me." "Does Mr. Ironwood know?" "Not yet." "Want me to tell him?" "No, I'll tell him myself." But when Willa went to find Thad, he was already walking across the ranch yard toward her. Gus must have signaled him somehow, or maybe he just knew the way disasters announce themselves. "Inside," Thad said. "My office, now." She followed him, her heart hammering. In the office, he closed the door and turned to face her. "Tell me everything." So she did, all of it. Edmund's secret gambling. The debts that appeared after his death. Clarence's cruelty, his accusations, his threats. The way he'd looked at her with calculating eyes and said she would work off the debt as his housekeeper, essentially his slave, until it was paid. Thad listened without interrupting. When she finished, his jaw was tight. "How much does he claim you owe?" $950, plus interest. He says it's $1,100 total now. And you don't believe the debt is legitimate. I know Edmund gambled, but I never signed anything. I never agreed to be responsible for his debts. Clarence produced papers after Edmund died, but I never saw them before that day. Thad walked to the window, looked out at his ranch, his land, his world that he'd built from nothing. "If this man takes you back to Boston, will you be safe?" The question was so gentle it nearly broke her. "No," Willa whispered. "I won't be safe. Clarence looks at me like I'm something he owns, something he can use. I'll disappear into his household and no one will ever see me again." Thad turned. His eyes were steel. "That's not going to happen. But the money? I'll handle the money. I can't let you do that. It's too much. I'll never be able to repay Willa." He crossed the room in 3 strides, stood close enough that she could see the silver threads in his dark hair, the faint scar on his jaw, the way his chest rose and fell with barely controlled anger. "Listen to me carefully. That man is not taking you anywhere. I don't care what papers he has. I don't care what he claims you owe. You're staying here. Why?" The word came out broken. "Why would you do this for me?" Thad's hands clenched at his sides. She could see him fighting some internal battle, deciding what to reveal, what to keep hidden. "Because you matter," he said finally, raw, honest. "To this ranch, to the men, to—" He stopped. swallowed hard. To me. You matter to me. Tears spilled down Willa's cheeks. I can't let you pay my debts. It's already decided. Thad, tomorrow when he comes, I'll handle it. You stay in the kitchen. You stay away from him. Let me deal with this. But, please, his voice softened. Let me protect you. It's the one thing I couldn't do for Lenora. Let me do it for you. Willa saw it then. The guilt he carried wasn't just about the past. It was about the future, too. About his fear of failing again, of standing by helpless, while someone he cared about suffered. All right, she whispered. All right. That night, Willa couldn't sleep. She lay in her narrow bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the sounds of the ranch settling into darkness. Somewhere in the main house, Thaddeus Ironwood was awake too. She could feel it the way you can feel a storm coming before the first drop of rain. Tomorrow, Clarence would come. Tomorrow the past would find her. Tomorrow everything might change. Willa thought about the last 7 weeks, the kitchen that had become her sanctuary, the men who had become her family, the quiet cowboy who fixed tables and left wildflowers and looked at her like she was something precious instead of something broken. She'd come here with nothing. She'd found everything. And tomorrow might take it all away. But for tonight she was here. She was safe. She was home. Willa closed her eyes and whispered a prayer to her grandmother's memory, to whatever gods watched over foolish women and wounded cowboys and second chances that shouldn't exist, but somehow did. Please, she whispered into the darkness, please let tomorrow be kind. The stars gave no answer, but somewhere in the night, an owl called, and the sound was almost like hope. Clarence Ashford arrived at noon the next day riding in a hired wagon with 2 men who wore their guns like promises. Willa watched from the kitchen window, her hands gripping the edge of the sink until her knuckles went white. Clarence looked exactly as she remembered, tall, thin, with pale eyes that never seemed to blink and a mouth that curved downward even when he smiled. He wore a black suit that was too fine for the dusty Wyoming territory, and he carried a leather satchel that undoubtedly held the papers he claimed gave him ownership of her life. The 2 hired guns flanked him, hard men with scarred faces and cold eyes, the kind of men who did unpleasant work for money and never asked questions. Thaddeus Ironwood stepped out onto the ranch house porch before Clarence could knock. He moved with deliberate calm, but Willa could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his hand rested near his hip where his gun belt sat. Gus and 4 other ranch hands materialized from various buildings, not threatening, just present, just watching. Mr. Ashford, Thad's voice carried across the yard. I'm Thaddeus Ironwood. This is my ranch. Clarence's thin lips curved in what might have been a smile. Mr. Ironwood, I'm here on a legal matter concerning Mrs. Willa Ashford. I understand she's employed here. She is. Then you'll understand I need to speak with her. She has obligations in Boston, financial obligations that must be resolved. I understand you claim she owes you money. Not a claim, Mr. Ironwood. A fact. Clarence patted his satchel. I have documentation signed by her late husband making her responsible for his debts. $1,100 to be precise. Since she cannot pay, she must return to Boston and work off the debt in my household as agreed. There was no agreement, Thad said flatly, and Mrs. Ashford isn't going anywhere. Clarence's expression hardened. This is a legal matter. I have a court order from a Boston court. This is Wyoming territory. Your jurisdiction ends at the Massachusetts border. Federal debt law requires you to prove the debt is legitimate, requires you to prove Mrs. Ashford agreed to assume responsibility. Can you do that? Clarence's jaw tightened. The papers are all properly filed and notarized. By who? By you. You're a lawyer, Mr. Ashford. You know how to make papers say whatever you want them to say. Thad descended the porch steps slowly. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to tell me exactly how much you claim is owed. I'm going to pay it. And then you're going to leave and never come back. In the kitchen, Willa's breath caught. He was really going to do it. Going to pay a fortune to a man who might be lying just to keep her safe. Clarence studied Thad with calculating eyes. $1,100. That's a substantial sum for a rancher to have lying around. I have it. And what do you expect in return from Mrs. Ashford? What arrangement have you made with her? The implication was clear. Ugly. Willa felt sick. Thad's voice went deadly quiet. You want to be very careful about what you say next. I'm simply clarifying the nature of your interest in my sister-in-law. My interest is that she's an employee of this ranch, a valued employee, and I protect what's mine. She's not yours, Mr. Ironwood. She's family, my responsibility. You threw her out, accused her of killing your brother, took everything she owned, and sent her away with nothing. That doesn't sound like family to me. That sounds like cruelty. Clarence's face flushed. You know nothing about... I know enough. Thad pulled a folded bank draft from his vest pocket. $1,200, $100 more than you claim she owes. The extra is for your trouble. Take it and go. Clarence stared at the draft. For a moment greed warred with something else in his expression, pride maybe, or the desire to inflict more pain. But greed won. It always did with men like him. He took the draft, examined it carefully. This better be good, Mr. Ironwood. It's drawn on the Helena Bank. You can verify it before you leave town. I will. Clarence tucked the draft into his satchel. Then he looked toward the kitchen window where Willa stood. Even from this distance, she could feel the malice in his gaze. You should know what you're protecting, Mr. Ironwood. She's not what she seems. She drove my brother to an early grave with her demands and her expectations. She's a curse on any household she enters. Get off my land, Thad said softly. Now, before I forget you're holding a paid debt, and remember only that you're insulting a woman under my protection. The two hired guns shifted nervously. They'd seen enough of Thad's ranch hands watching from the shadows. They'd seen enough of Thad himself, the coiled violence beneath his calm exterior. We're leaving, Clarence said. He climbed back into the wagon. But mark my words, Ironwood, she'll bring you nothing but trouble. She's already brought me more good than you could comprehend. Now get. The wagon turned and rolled away, dust rising in its wake. Thad stood watching until it disappeared down the trail toward a town. Then, and only then, did his shoulders sag slightly. Gus approached, and Thad spoke to him in low tones Willa couldn't hear. She wanted to run out to him, to thank him, to apologize, to ask why he'd spent such a fortune on her, but her legs wouldn't move. She could only stand at the window, tears streaming down her face, and watch the man who'd just bought her freedom at a cost she could never repay. That evening, Willa prepared Thad's dinner tray with trembling hands. She made everything perfect. Pot roast so tender it fell apart at the touch of a fork. Roasted vegetables glazed with butter and herbs, fresh bread still warm from the oven. Apple pie with a crust that was both flaky and golden. She arranged it all with care, added a sprig of mint, poured coffee that was strong and hot. Then she carried the tray to his office herself. She knocked, waited. When his voice called, "Come in," she pushed the door open with her hip. Thad looked up from his ledger. Surprise flickered across his face when he saw her instead of Gus. "Miss Ashford?" "Mr. Ironwood." Willa set the tray on his desk. "I wanted to bring this myself. I wanted to—" Her voice faltered. "I don't know what to say. Thank you seems impossibly inadequate." "You don't owe me thanks. I owe you $1,200. No." Thad's voice was firm. "You don't owe me anything. But, Willa, sit down, please." She sat in the chair across from his desk, her hands folded in her lap to hide their shaking. Thad pushed the ledger aside. "That man was a snake. I've seen enough of his kind to recognize it. Half those debts were probably fabricated. He preyed on your grief and your vulnerability, and he would have taken everything from you, your freedom, your dignity, maybe your life. I couldn't let that happen. Why not?" The question burst from her. "Why would you spend a fortune on someone you barely know, someone who's only been here 7 weeks? It doesn't make sense." Thad was quiet for a long moment. In the lamplight, no, in the candlelight. Willa corrected herself, seeing the dozen thick candles burning around the room. His face looked older, more lined, more tired. When Lenora died, he said finally, I couldn't save her. I tried. God knows I tried. I ran into that burning cabin, and the heat drove me back. I could hear her calling my name, and I couldn't reach her. For 8 years I've lived with that failure, with knowing I was supposed to protect her, and I couldn't. His voice grew rough. Then you came here, broken and desperate, and carrying everything you owned in a flour sack, and you didn't ask for pity. You didn't ask for charity. You just asked for a chance to work, to prove yourself, and every day since you've done that, you've fed us, cared for us, made this ranch feel like a home instead of just a place where men sleep between work days. He looked directly at her. I couldn't save Lenora, but I could save you, and maybe that's selfish. Maybe I did it for me as much as for you, but I don't regret it. I'd do it again. Willa's eyes burned with tears. I'll pay you back, every cent. It might take years, but I'll do it. No. Thad, you'll do no such thing. That money bought your freedom, your safety, and those things have no price. He paused. But if you want to repay me, you can do it by staying, by continuing to make this ranch a home, by being— He stopped, swallowed hard. By being here. The air between them felt charged, heavy with words unspoken. I want to stay, Willa whispered, more than I can say. Then it settled. They sat in silence for a moment. Then Thad looked down at the tray she'd brought. This looks exceptional. I made it special, to say thank you, even though words aren't enough. Would you? Thad hesitated. Would you eat with me? Just this once. I don't want to eat alone tonight. Willa's heart stuttered. I'd be honored. She went back to the kitchen and fixed her own plate. When she returned, Thad had cleared space at his desk. They ate together in the candlelight, not saying much, but the silence was comfortable, companionable. When they finished, Thad walked her to the kitchen door. The ranch was quiet around them, the hands already asleep in the bunkhouse. Willa, Thad said, what I said earlier, about you mattering to me, I meant it. I know. I don't know what this is between us. I don't know what it means or where it goes, but I know I don't want you to leave. Willa looked up at him. In the moonlight, his face was all plains and shadows, beautiful in its roughness. I'm not going anywhere, she said. This is home now. Something eased in his expression. Relief, maybe, or hope. Good night, Willa. Good night, Thaddeus. She watched him walk back to the main house, watched until he disappeared inside. Then she went to her small room and sat on her bed, her heart too full for sleep. Everything had changed. And nothing had changed. She was still the cook. He was still the boss. But something between them had shifted, had deepened, had become more than either of them quite knew what to do with. Tomorrow there would be breakfast to make, bread to bake, men to feed. Life would go on as it always did, but nothing would ever be quite the same. The next 3 weeks brought an unexpected continuation of summer's heat. August stretched into September, but the temperatures didn't drop. The sun beat down, merciless and hot. The grass dried to tinder. Water in the creek dropped to levels the old-timers said they hadn't seen in 20 years. The cattle grew restless, and the men worked double shifts to keep them from straying too far in search of water. Thad pushed himself hardest of all. He was up before dawn and didn't stop until after dark, working alongside his men, driving himself with an intensity that worried everyone. He's going to collapse if he keeps this up, Gus said to Willa one afternoon. Won't listen to reason. That evening, Willa prepared a special supper. Cold fried chicken, potato salad with fresh dill, sliced tomatoes from the garden, sweet tea so cold it made your teeth ache. She carried it out to where Thad was fixing a section of fence that had broken when panicked cattle tried to reach the creek. Mr. Ironwood, she called, you need to eat. Later, he said, not looking up. Now, you haven't stopped for 10 hours. Willa, sit down and eat. or I'll stand here all night." He looked at her then, saw the determination in her face. Despite his exhaustion, his mouth quirked in something almost like a smile. "Yes, ma'am." They sat in the shade of a cottonwood tree and ate together. Thad devoured the food like he hadn't realized how hungry he was. "You're going to make yourself sick," Willa said, "working like this in this heat." "Can't be helped. The ranch needs its owner alive and functional, not dead from heat stroke. I'm fine. You're stubborn. You're bossy." They looked at each other, and suddenly they were both smiling. Actually smiling something that felt foreign and wonderful all at once. "Truce," Thad said. "Only if you promise to rest. I'll rest when the work's done." "Stubborn," Willa repeated, but fondly. That evening, as the sun finally began to set, Thad found her on the back porch of the kitchen. She was shelling peas for tomorrow's dinner, her fingers moving automatically while she watched the sky turn purple and gold. He sat down beside her without asking, took a handful of pea pods, and started helping. "My mother used to make me do this," he said. "Shell peas, snap beans, shuck corn. Said it built character. Did it? I don't know. Maybe. Or maybe she just needed the help." They worked in companionable silence. When they finished, Thad didn't leave. He just sat there, shoulder almost but not quite touching hers. "It's going to storm soon," he said, looking at the horizon. "You can feel it in the air. Is that good or bad? Good if it's rain, bad if it's lightning. With everything this dry—" He didn't finish the sentence, but he didn't need to. "Fire," Willa said softly. "Yeah." She could feel the tension in him at just the word. 8 years since Lenora died, and the fear of fire still lived in his bones. "We'll be careful," Willa said. "We'll watch. And if fire comes, we'll fight it together." Thad looked at her. "You'd do that fight fire. I'd do anything to protect this place. This home." Something shifted in his expression. Gratitude, wonder, and something else. Something that made her heart beat faster. "I should go," he said, but he didn't move, neither did she. They sat on the porch as darkness fell, not talking, just being, present with each other in a way that felt both dangerous and exactly right. When Thad finally stood to leave, he paused. His hand lifted, hesitated, then gently touched her shoulder, just for a moment. Just long enough for her to feel the warmth of his palm through her dress. "Thank you, Willa, for everything." Then he was gone, swallowed by the darkness. Willa sat alone on the porch, her shoulder still warm where he'd touched her, and wondered how it was possible to feel this much for someone while still carrying the ghost of another love. How it was possible to heal while still remembering the wound. The sky rumbled with distant thunder. The storm was coming. The lightning struck 3 days later in the dead of night. Willa woke to shouting. She threw on her clothes and ran outside to see an orange glow on the eastern horizon. Fire in the dried grass spreading fast, pushed by the wind toward the ranch buildings. Men poured from the bunkhouse half-dressed, grabbing buckets and shovels and anything that might fight flames. Gus was organizing them, his voice cutting through the chaos. "Form a line from the well, pass, buckets, move." But where was Thad? Willa's eyes scanned the yard. Then she saw him, standing frozen near the main barn, staring at the approaching fire. His face was pale in the orange light. His hands trembled violently. His whole body had gone rigid. "Boss!" Gus shouted. "Boss, we need you!" Thad didn't move, didn't respond. He just stared at the flames with eyes that saw not this fire, but another fire. Not this night, but a night 8 years ago. "It's happening again," Thad whispered. His voice was barely audible, but Willa was close enough to hear. "The fire, Lenora, she's in there. I can't." He was having a complete breakdown. Trauma overwhelming reason. The pyrophobia that he'd managed to control for 8 years, the fear that made him light candles instead of oil lamps, that made him tense at the sight of any flame larger than a match, had finally shattered him completely. The fire was getting closer. maybe 10 minutes before it reached the barn, less if the wind picked up. The men looked to Thad, waited for orders, but their boss was gone, lost in memory and terror. Willa felt something crystallize inside her, a clarity, a purpose. She ran to the center of the yard and shouted with every ounce of breath in her lungs, "Listen to me, all of you, right now." 14 men turned to stare at her, a woman, a cook, giving orders. She didn't hesitate. "You three?" She pointed at the nearest cowboys. "Buckets from the well, fill them and start passing, go!" They ran. "You two open the stable, get every horse out, take them to the far pasture." They obeyed. "Gus, I need a line from the well to the barn. Get men passing buckets fast." Gus didn't question. He just started organizing. "Billy, take Mr. Ironwood inside the house. Stay with him." Billy grabbed Thad's arm and pulled him away from the flame. Thad went without fighting, his eyes still fixed on the fire, seeing ghosts. Willa ran to the well herself, filled a bucket, soaked a cloth, and tied it around her face. Then she ran toward the fire. The heat was incredible, like standing too close to an oven, but everywhere all at once. Smoke stung her eyes and burned her lungs. But she didn't stop. She threw water on the flames, grabbed another bucket, threw more. The men formed the line Gus had organized, passing full buckets up and empty buckets back. Willa was everywhere, shouting orders, directing efforts, filling in gaps when men faltered. The barn. Protect the barn. Don't let it reach the barn. They fought for what felt like hours. Might have been 30 minutes. Might have been 3. Time became meaningless, measured only in buckets thrown and ground defended. The fire crept closer to the barn. Too close. If it caught, they'd lose everything. The building, the equipment stored inside, maybe the whole ranch. Willa made a decision. "I need 4 men with me. We're going to cut a fire break." They grabbed shovels and started digging desperately, turning over the dry grass to expose bare earth, creating a gap the fire couldn't cross. Willa dug alongside them, her hands blistering her shoulders, screaming, her lungs choking on smoke. "Faster! It's almost here." They dug like their lives depended on it. Because they did. The fire reached the firebreak. Flames licked at the turned earth. For one terrible moment, Willa thought it would jump the gap, thought everything they'd done would fail. Then the fire hesitated, flickered. Without fuel, it began to die. Men threw water on the remaining flames, stamped them out, beat them with shovels and blankets and bare hands. Finally, impossibly, the fire was out. The barn was safe. The ranch was safe. Men collapsed to the ground, coughing and exhausted. Willa stood for a moment longer, swaying, her vision swimming. Her hands were raw and bleeding. Her clothes were scorched. Her face was black with soot. But she'd done it. They'd done it. Her legs gave way. She sat down hard in the dirt, suddenly unable to stand. Gus appeared beside her. "Ma'am, you saved us. You saved the whole damn ranch." Willa couldn't speak, could barely breathe. She just nodded. Someone brought water. She drank it greedily, coughing when it hit her smoke-raw throat. Then she remembered. "Thad?" she croaked. "Where's Thad?" "In the house, ma'am. Billy's with him." Willa forced herself to stand. Her legs shook. Everything hurt. But she had to see him. She found him in his office, sitting with his head in his hands. Billy stood nearby, looking uncertain and worried. Candles burned everywhere, lighting the room bright as day. "Thank you, Billy," Willa said hoarsely. "You can go help the others." Billy left gratefully, closing the door behind him. Willa approached Thad slowly, knelt down in front of his chair, put her blistered hands on his knees. "Thaddeus," she said gently, "it's over. The fire's out. Everything's safe." He looked up at her with eyes that were drowning in shame and grief. "I froze," he said, voice broken. "I saw the flames, and I was back there, that night. I could hear Lenora calling my name. I could smell the smoke and feel the heat, and I couldn't move. I couldn't—" His voice failed. Tears ran down his weathered cheeks. Willa's heart broke for him. "You don't need to explain. I understand. I'm supposed to protect this ranch, these men, and I couldn't. Thad, look at me. She waited until his eyes met hers. You've been carrying this guilt for 8 years. You've been punishing yourself for something you couldn't control. But tonight showed something important. You don't have to carry everything alone. You don't have to be invincible. You have people who will stand with you, who will fight when you can't. You shouldn't have had to, but I did, and we won. Together. Not because of one person, but because we all fought. That's what family does. Thad stared at her, at this woman who'd arrived 9 weeks ago with nothing, who'd just led his men through fire and saved his ranch, who knelt before him now soot-stained and blistered and still thinking of him instead of herself. "You're incredible," he whispered. "You're the bravest, strongest person I've ever known. No." He reached out his hands, cupping her face with infinite gentleness. "You're not just anything. You're extraordinary, and He stopped, swallowed hard. "I don't want to lose you. I can't lose you." "You won't," Willa said. "I'm right here." "No, I mean—" Thad took a shaking breath. "I'm falling in love with you, Willa. Maybe I already have fallen. And it terrifies me because I loved Lenora and I lost her, and I don't know if I can survive that kind of loss again. But I also don't know how to stop feeling this way." Willa's breath caught. Her heart hammered so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. "I'm scared too," she admitted. "I loved Edmund, and he betrayed me. I thought I'd never trust anyone again, never love anyone again. But then you—" her voice broke. "You're the kindest, most decent man I've ever known, and I think I'm falling in love with you too." They stared at each other in the candlelight. Two broken people who'd somehow found each other, who'd somehow started healing without even realizing it. Thad leaned forward, touched his forehead to hers. Just that, just breathing the same air, existing in the same space. "I don't know how to do this," he whispered. "Neither do I. But maybe we figure it out together." "Together," he repeated, like a promise. They stayed like that for a long moment. Then Willa pulled back, wincing, as her blistered hands reminded her of their existence. "You're hurt," Thad said, suddenly focused. "Let me see." He examined her hands gently. They were raw and bleeding, in places blistered badly. "We need to treat these. Come on." He led her to the kitchen and made her sit while he found clean water and bandages. He cleaned her hands with a care that made her want to cry, then wrapped them in soft cloth. "You should rest," he said. "So should you." "I will, if you will." "Together." The word slipped out before she could stop it. Thad looked at her, a long, considering look. Then he held out his hand. "Together." She took his hand with her bandaged one. They walked through the darkened house to her small room. Thad sat in the chair. Willa lay on the bed. And they stayed like that as dawn began to break outside the window. Not speaking. Not touching beyond that one point of contact. Just together. Just healing. Just beginning to believe that maybe, just maybe, they both deserved a second chance at happiness. Outside, the ranch began to wake. Men emerged from the bunkhouse surveying the damage. It was significant but not devastating. The barn was saved. The buildings were intact. They would rebuild, replant, recover. And in the small room, two people who'd survived loss and fire and the weight of guilt finally allowed themselves to hope. The sun rose golden over Ironwood Ridge. A new day, a new beginning. And love, quiet and tentative but real, took root in the ashes. The days following the fire brought changes neither Willa nor Thad could have predicted. The first change was immediate and visible. Thad didn't retreat back into isolation. He took his meals in the dining hall with the men. Not every meal, some habits died hard, but breakfast twice a week and Sunday dinner without fail. The cowboys treated this miracle with the reverence it deserved. They didn't make a fuss, didn't draw attention, just passed him the biscuits and talked about the weather and pretended this was how it had always been. But Willa saw the way Gus's eyes shone with something like relief, saw the way Hank sat up a little straighter, saw the way Billy actually smiled when he served Thad coffee. Their boss was coming back to life. The second change was more subtle, but no less profound. 3 days after the fire, Willa woke to find a bouquet on her kitchen workbench. Not wildflowers this time, but roses. Real roses, pink and fragrant, that must have cost a fortune at the general store in Redemption Creek. Beside them sat a note in strong, angular handwriting for the woman who runs toward fire instead of away from it. Willa pressed the note to her chest and allowed herself to cry. Happy tears for once. Healing tears. That afternoon, Thad appeared in the kitchen while she was kneading bread. "Walk with me," he asked. They walked to the ridge overlooking the valley, the place where Willa had first seen the ranch 10 weeks ago. It felt like a lifetime. They sat on a flat boulder, shoulders touching, watching the cattle graze in the distance. "I want to tell you something," Thad said. "About Lenora. About the fire." Willa took his hand. "You don't have to." "I do. Because I want there to be no secrets between us. No shadows." So he told her. All of it. How Lenora had been 5 months pregnant when she died, though Thad hadn't known until after. How she'd been planning to tell him that very night, had baked his favorite cake as a surprise. How the fire had started from an oil lamp tipping over. Lenora had been tired, had dozed off while reading, and the flame had caught the curtains. How Thad had heard her screams from a quarter-mile away, had run faster than he'd ever run in his life. How he'd tried 3 times to enter the burning cabin, how the 3rd time the roof beam had fallen and knocked him unconscious. How Gus had pulled him out, saving his life. How when Thad woke up 3 days later, both Lenora and their unborn child were gone. "I blamed myself," Thad said, his voice breaking, "for not being there, for not waking up when the lamp fell, for not saving them. I blamed oil lamps, blamed fire itself. I couldn't abide any flame I couldn't control. Candles I could manage, but oil lamps, bonfires, even cooking over open flame made me shake." "That's why you never went to the dining hall," Willa said softly. "The big stove, the open flame." "Yes, and why I hired cooks. Someone had to feed the men, and I couldn't do it myself without—" He gestured helplessly. "Without facing the thing that killed her." "Yes." They sat in silence for a moment, then Willa spoke. "Thaddeus, what happened to Lenora was a tragedy, a horrible accident. But it wasn't your fault. You couldn't have known. You couldn't have prevented it. I should have been there. You were hunting, providing for your family, doing what any good husband does." Willa squeezed his hand. "Lenora wouldn't want you to spend 8 years punishing yourself. She'd want you to live, to be happy, to love again." Thad looked at her with eyes that held a lifetime of pain. "How do you know?" "Because I know what it's like to lose someone. And if I died tomorrow, I wouldn't want Edmund to stop living. Even after all the lying, all the betrayal, I'd still want him to find joy again. That's what love is." "What is it?" "Wanting the person you love to be happy, even after you're gone." Thad was quiet for a long moment. Then he lifted their joined hands and pressed a kiss to her bandaged knuckles. "You make me want to be happy again," he said. "You make me want to live instead of just exist." "Then live with me," Willa whispered. "Not as employer and employee, not as rancher and cook, as partners, as whatever we're becoming." Thad turned to face her fully. "Willa Temperance Ashford, are you asking me to court you?" She felt her cheeks heat. "I suppose I am. If you would want—" He kissed her. It was gentle, tentative. The kiss of 2 people who'd forgotten how to do this, or who'd never quite known how to do it right. But it was real, and it was theirs. When they pulled apart, both of them were smiling. "I'll take that as a yes," Willa said. "That's a yes," Thad confirmed. "Absolutely a yes." The 3rd week after the fire brought an unexpected visitor. Willa was in the kitchen preparing lunch when she heard a familiar voice from the yard. "Hello? Anybody home?" She ran to the window. Old Zeke Coldwater stood beside his wagon, leaning on his walking stick, grinning, like he held the world's best secret. Willa flew out the door and nearly knocked the old man over with her hug. "Easy there, daughter. These old bones ain't what they used to be." "Zeke, what are you doing here?" "Came to check on you, of course. Heard some interesting rumors in town." His eyes twinkled. "Something about you saving the whole ranch from fire. About you giving orders to grown men twice your size. About you being courted by the broken cowboy himself." Willa felt her face flame. "Rumors travel fast." "They do indeed. Especially when Gus Dalton comes to town for supplies and can't stop talking about how Miss Willa is the bravest woman in the territory." Zeke squeezed her hand. "I'm proud of you, girl. Knew you had spine. Knew you had something special. But even I didn't guess you'd turn that ranch and that man completely around in just 3 months." "It's not just me," Willa protested. Thad is it?" Zeke's grin widened. "Not Mr. Ironwood anymore." "Oh, hush." Thad emerged from the barn and stopped when he saw Zeke. For a moment the two men just looked at each other. Then Thad crossed the yard and pulled the old man into an embrace. "You old schemer," Thad said, but his voice was warm. "You sent her here on purpose, didn't you?" "I sent her here because you needed a cook," Zeke replied innocently. "What happened after that was all your doing. You sent her knowing exactly what would happen. I sent her knowing she could cook a pot of beans that made me cry. The rest," Zeke shrugged, "the rest was divine providence, or dumb luck, or maybe just two stubborn people finally figuring out they deserved to be happy." Thad laughed. Actually laughed. The sound was rusty, like it hadn't been used in years, but it was genuine. "Stay for lunch," Thad said. "Stay for supper. Hell, stay the week if you want. We owe you more than we can ever repay." "Lunch sounds fine," Zeke said. "Can't stay longer. Got a store to run. But I wanted to see with my own eyes that you two had figured it out." Over lunch pot roast with all the fixings and, yes, a pot of beans that Willa made special, Zeke regaled them with stories of the town, including one that made Willa's hands still on her fork. "Serafina Locke left 2 weeks ago," Zeke said casually. "Closed up the Gold Dust Saloon and took the train east. Said Wyoming had gotten too boring for her tastes. Left, Willa couldn't believe it. Just like that. Just like that. Though I heard from the bank manager that she'd made some bad investments. Tried to buy up land around various ranches, thinking she could force sales. But the drought broke right after your fire. Did you know that big rainstorm rolled through the next day? Saved all the ranches she'd been betting would fail. She lost a fortune." Zeke took a bite of pot roast. "Funny how things work out sometimes. Woman who tried to prey on others' misfortunes ended up facing her own. Divine justice, some might call it." Willa and Thad exchanged glances. They'd been spared not just fire, but another kind of predator entirely. After lunch, Zeke prepared to leave. He hugged Willa tight. "You did good, daughter, real good. Your grandmother would be proud." "Thank you, Zeke, for everything. For that first meal, for the cornbread, for pointing me here. All I did was recognize something special when I tasted it. The rest was all you." He turned to Thad. "You take care of her, you hear? She's 1 in a million." "I know," Thad said solemnly. "I will." "And Thad, let yourself be happy. Lenora would want that. I knew her, remember. She'd box your ears if she knew you spent 8 years in mourning." Thad's eyes glistened. "I know that too." Zeke climbed into his wagon and tipped his hat. "I'll expect a wedding invitation. Don't make me wait too long." As the wagon rolled away, Willa leaned into Thad's side. His arm came around her shoulders automatically. "A wedding," Willa mused. "He's getting ahead of himself." "Is he?" Thad asked quietly. Willa looked up at him. "Is he? I don't know. You tell me. Is 3 months too soon to know you want to spend your life with someone?" "I knew in 3 weeks," Willa admitted. "The rest was just my head catching up to my heart." "Then maybe Zeke's not getting ahead of himself. Maybe he's just perceptive." They stood in the yard, wrapped in each other, watching the wagon disappear down the trail. 6 weeks later, mid-November, With the first hint of winter in the air, Will awoke to find Thad standing in her doorway. "Come with me," he said. "I want to show you something." He led her to the ridge again, but this time when they crested the hill, Willa gasped. The entire valley was covered in a light dusting of snow, the first snow of the season. It made everything look new, clean, like a fresh start. "It's beautiful," Willa breathed. "I used to hate winter," Thad said. "It was winter when Lenora died. The fire looked even more terrible against the snow. For 8 years I dreaded the first snowfall. And now I see it differently. Now I see," he turned to her, "now I see new beginnings, second chances, the world starting over." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. Willa's breath caught. "I know we've only known each other 4 months," Thad said. "I know this is fast. I know people will talk, but Willa, I also know that I don't want to spend another day without you as my partner in every sense of the word." He opened the box. Inside was a simple gold ring with a small diamond. "It was my grandmother's," Thad said. "The only piece of jewelry I have from my family. I gave Lenora a different ring, one we'd bought together, but this one was waiting. For you." He dropped to one knee in the snow. "Willa Temperance Ashford, will you marry me? Will you be my wife, my partner, my family? Will you let me spend the rest of my life proving that you're worth more than you ever believed?" Willa was crying, happy tears streaming down her face. "Yes," she said, "yes, yes, yes." He slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly. Then he stood and kissed her, and the snow fell around them like a blessing. They were married 3 weeks later, on the first Sunday of December. The ceremony was held at the ranch in the dining hall that had become the heart of their home. Every ranch hand attended dressed in their Sunday best. Gus stood as Thad's best man. Old Zeke traveled up from town to give Willa away since she had no family of her own. The circuit preacher, a kind man named Reverend Walsh, performed the ceremony. Willa wore a dress that the women of Redemption Creek had made for her. When word got out that the woman who saved Ironwood Ridge was getting married, donations had poured in. Fabric lace ribbons. The town's seamstress had worked for 2 weeks to create something beautiful. The dress was simple but elegant. Cream-colored wool for warmth with delicate embroidery at the collar and cuffs. It fit Willa like it had been made for her because it had been with love and care and the gratitude of a community that had judged her on arrival and been proven wonderfully wrong. Thad wore a new suit, black and formal, but he'd kept his work boots. "A rancher's a rancher," he'd said, even on his wedding day. When it came time for vows, Thad spoke first. "Willa, you came into my life when I'd given up on living, when I thought the best years were behind me, and all that remained was work and duty and slow decline. You showed me that broken things can heal, that closed hearts can open, that it's never too late for second chances." His voice grew thick with emotion. "I promise to protect you, cherish you, and stand beside you through every storm. I promise to light candles in the darkness and share every meal at your side. I promise to listen when you sing and to never take for granted the gift of your presence in my life. I love you, Willa, today and always." Willa's hands trembled as she spoke her vows. "Thaddeus, when I arrived at your ranch, I had nothing. No home, no hope, no future. I said I wasn't worth much. You proved me wrong every day. You showed me that worth isn't measured in what we've lost, but in what we're brave enough to try again." She squeezed his hands. "I promise to stand with you in fire and peace, to feed not just your body but your soul, to sing in your kitchen and laugh in your sorrow and remind you every day that you deserve happiness. I love you, Thaddeus, with all that I am and all that I'll become." Reverend Walsh pronounced them husband and wife. And when Thad kissed her, the dining hall erupted in cheers. The celebration lasted into the night. Willa had cooked for days in preparation a feast unlike anything the ranch had ever seen. Roasted beef, glazed ham, fresh bread, 3 kinds of pie, And yes, a pot of beans made exactly as she'd made them that first night in Redemption Creek, in honor of where it all began. Old Zeke stood to give a toast, his voice carrying over the happy chaos. "I'm an old man. I've seen a lot in my 71 years. I've seen love and lost, joy and sorrow, beginnings and endings. But I've never seen anything quite like what I'm seeing tonight." He raised his glass. To Willa and Thad, two people who had every reason to give up but didn't. Two people who found each other in the darkness and became each other's light. May your lives be long. May your love be strong. And may your table always be filled with people you care about and food made with love. To Willa and Thad, the room chorused. Thad pulled Willa close and whispered in her ear, "Thank you." For what? For saying yes, for staying, for being brave enough to love a broken cowboy. Thank you for being brave enough to love a woman who cooks beans in empty plazas. They laughed together, and it was the best sound either of them had ever heard. That night, after the guests had gone, and the dishes were washed, and the candles burned low, Willa and Thad walked hand in hand to the main house. Their house now. Their home. Thad had prepared the master bedroom, the room he'd built for Lenora, but hadn't been able to enter since her death. He'd cleaned it, aired it out, filled it with candles and fresh linens. He'd hung Willa's grandmother's apron on a peg by the door. "It's perfect," Willa said. And it was, not because it was grand or fancy, but because it was theirs. Epilogue. 1 year later, December 1883, arrived with fresh snow and new possibilities. Ironwood Ridge Ranch had never been more prosperous. The cattle herd had grown to 400 head. They'd hired 6 more hands. The barn that had nearly burned was rebuilt bigger and better than before. But the biggest change wasn't visible in the buildings or the livestock. It was visible in the people. Thad Ironwood smiled now, regularly. He ate every meal with his men and his wife. He'd even started helping Willa in the kitchen sometimes, though he still claimed his biscuits were barely edible. Gus Dalton had married widow Abigail Winters from town. They lived in a small cottage on the ranch property, and Abigail helped Willa with the cooking and household management. Billy had gone back east to visit his sister, carrying gifts and letters from the entire ranch. He'd returned with her in tow 16-year-old Molly, who'd wanted to see the West and had stayed on to help with the kitchen and the garden. Hank had retired from active ranch work and now oversaw the stables, teaching young hands the art of horse training with patience and wisdom. Samuel's daughter had written back. She was coming to visit in the spring. And Willa stood in the kitchen on a cold December morning, one hand pressed to her gently rounded belly, and smiled. She was 4 months pregnant. She'd told Thad 2 weeks ago, and he'd cried. Actually cried tears of joy and fear and wonder all mixed together. "You're sure?" he had asked, voice shaking. "I'm sure." "And you're healthy? The baby's healthy. Dr. Morrison says everything looks perfect. He'll check on us regularly." Thad had pulled her close, so gentle, like she was made of glass. "I'm scared. I know. I'm terrified I'll lose you, like I lost Lenora. I know that too. But Thad, look at me." She'd cupped his face. "I'm not Lenora. This isn't 8 years ago. We have a doctor close by. We have help. We have each other. And this baby is a gift, a blessing. Our future." "Our future," he'd repeated like a prayer. Now in the kitchen, Willa kneaded bread and sang her grandmother's French songs. She felt the baby flutter, just the faintest movement, but it was there. Thad walked in, covered in snow from feeding the horses. He stomped his boots and crossed to her, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "How are my 2 favorite people?" he murmured, his hand joining hers on her belly. "We're good. Baby's active today. Already a troublemaker like their mama." "Excuse me, I'm not a troublemaker. You're the woman who gave orders to 14 cowboys during a wildfire. You're absolutely a troublemaker." Willa laughed and leaned back into his embrace. "Thad, I've been thinking about names. If it's a girl, I'd like to call her Lenora Temperance Ironwood, to honor the woman who came before me, the woman who loved you and made you capable of loving again." Thad was quiet for a long moment. Then he pressed a kiss to her temple. "Lenora would have liked you," he said quietly. "She would have been grateful that you found me, that you didn't give up on the broken man she left behind. And if it's a boy, Edmund Ezekiel Ironwood, for your husband who started your journey west, and for the old man who ended it in exactly the right place." Willa turned in his arms. "You do that honor Edmund after everything. Edmund brought you into existence, brought you to me even if he didn't mean to. Without him, without that journey, we'd never have met. So, yes, I'd honor him." She kissed him, then soft and sweet and full of love. The kitchen door banged open. Gus stuck his head in. "Sorry to interrupt, but we got a visitor. Woman asking for Willa." Willa and Thad exchanged glances. They walked to the front of the house. A wagon sat in the yard, and stepping down from it, dressed in traveling clothes and carrying a small valise, was a young woman with familiar hazel eyes and chestnut hair. "Willa," the woman said tentatively. "It's me, Margaret, your sister-in-law." Willa's heart stopped. Margaret. Edmund's younger sister, the only member of the Ashford family who'd been kind to her. "Margaret, what are you doing here?" The young woman, no more than 22, burst into tears. "I couldn't stay in Boston anymore. After you left, Clarence got worse, meaner. He drove the business into the ground and blamed me, said I was too stupid to help, too useless to marry off. He was going to force me into a marriage with a horrible old man just to settle his gambling debts." She took a shaking breath. "So I ran. I took what little money Mother left me and I ran. And I remembered you'd gone west. I remembered you'd written to Edmund about a place called Redemption Creek. So I came looking, hoping, praying you'd help me even after how terribly we treated you." Willa didn't hesitate. She crossed the yard and pulled Margaret into her arms. "You're safe now," she said. "You're family, and family is always welcome here." Margaret sobbed against her shoulder. Thank you, I don't deserve—" "Hush. You deserve a second chance, just like I got one." Thad appeared beside them. "Miss Margaret, welcome to Ironwood Ridge. Any family of Willa's is family of mine. We'll get you settled. You can stay as long as you need." Margaret looked between them with wonder. "You're married." "4 months now," Willa said, beaming. "And you're happy." "Happier than I ever thought possible." That night, after Margaret was settled in a guest room after dinner was served, and dishes washed, and candles lit throughout the house, Willa and Thad sat on their bed. "You have a big heart," Thad said, "taking in your husband's sister after his family threw you out. She's not Clarence. She's just a girl who needs help. How could I turn her away? Most people would. We're not most people." Thad smiled. "No, we're definitely not." He pulled her close, his hand resting on her belly where their child grew. "Do you ever think about where we'd be if you hadn't gotten on that train?" Thad asked. "If you'd stayed in Boston, if you'd never made beans in an empty plaza." "Sometimes," Willa admitted. "But I try not to, because that life, the one where I didn't come here, that's not a life I want to imagine." "Neither do I." They sat in comfortable silence, listening to the wind outside and the crackling of candles and the sounds of their ranch settling in for the night. "Thad, do you remember what I wrote in my journal that first night? The night you gave me the job?" "What did you write?" "I wrote that maybe we couldn't fix each other. Maybe we couldn't fix ourselves. But perhaps together we wouldn't be so broken." "And?" Thad prompted. "And I was wrong. We did fix each other. We fixed ourselves, not by erasing the cracks, but by filling them with gold, by making the broken places stronger than they were before." Thad turned her to face him. "You know what that's called? That Japanese art of fixing broken pottery with gold?" "No." "Kintsugi. I read about it in a book once. The idea is that the breaking and repairing becomes part of the object's history, makes it more valuable, not less." "Kintsugi," Willa repeated. "I like that. That's us. We're kintsugi, broken and mended, and more beautiful for it." Willa kissed him, then long and slow and sweet. Outside, snow continued to fall. Inside, candles burned warm and steady. And in the kitchen, 3 items sat clean and ready. For tomorrow, a blackened skillet, a cracked clay pot, and a wooden spoon, worn smooth by 4 generations of love. Morning would come. There would be bread to bake, and men to feed, and a ranch to run, and a baby to prepare for, and a new family member to welcome, and 1,000 ordinary miracles to witness. But for now, there was this moment, this love, this home, this second chance at happiness that neither of them had dared to hope for. Willa Temperance Ironwood, no longer worth not much, but worth everything, fell asleep in her husband's arms, dreaming of futures and family, and the taste of hope that had started with a simple pot of beans. And somewhere in the stars above Wyoming Territory, in whatever place spirits go, when bodies fail, perhaps Lenora May Ironwood smiled, perhaps Edmund Ashford found peace. Perhaps Willa's grandmother hummed an old French song. Perhaps they all looked down at the ranch below, at the broken people who'd become whole, at the love that had grown from ashes, at the proof that even in the darkest times, kindness and courage and a good meal can change everything. And perhaps they whispered, "Well done."